Okay, here we are again. And I now have Michael with me, and he is going to tell you more about databases in the cloud, I believe, this time, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, okay. So without further ado, oh, actually, let's just make sure you are all joining me. Yeah, I can see 50 people are here. And if you guys could just, again, confirm in the chat that you can see and hear us, we will get going. Yep, Matthias is my man. He always tells us we're here. Okay, here we go. It's over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Heather. Okay, hello to everyone, and welcome to the third day of LiveCode Global, and this is coincidentally the third part of the databases talk. It's actually a really beautiful day here in Edinburgh. And I know us Brits tend to go on about the weather, but this is actually something to talk about. A beautiful day in Edinburgh doesn't really happen that often. We're certainly not in the middle of August, surprisingly. Anyhow, let's get on with the talk now. If you remember from the first two parts, we created a local database app using SQLite, and it was a simple notes app. So I'll just go over and share my screen, and we'll go over with our app, what our app looked like from the first two sessions. Excuse me while I share this. Face, so it's a bit more functional or a bit more usable. Previously it was kind of good for showing you around and showing you how everything worked, but now it's been tidied up and rejigged a little bit, so it kind of makes a bit more sense than that. So you might remember you could create a note. So if you click on the new button here, it creates a note. Each note has a title and a body. Tick button. And there we go, we've got our new note. This is displayed in a data grid. So you remember we had a single notes table which stored all our notes. Each note had a title, a body, as we mentioned, and an edited date, a created and edited date. You can see that there. And that was our simple notes table. And if you remember, it was an SQLite database that was created on the app's startup. So each time the app started, it created a brand new notes.db database. This location was dependent on the platform. Here, when we're running on the IDE, it creates it next to the script, the LiveCode stack rather. So it creates that on startup and populates it if it isn't already there. So we notice we've got our new note populated in our present in our data grid. We can double click on the note and edit it, so we can maybe add a little bit more to our body. And we can, easy. And we can click tick again, and that will save it, and there it is updated in the database there. And another thing we did to our notes was we added the ability to add attachments. So let me just take a little screenshot here. And I'll add that to our note as an attachment. There we go. Anytime. There we go. So we've got there, we could add a couple of attachments. So, our second attachment there, and there's our first and second attachments there. Save our note there, tick, and there we go, there's our new note, and there's the attachments there on it. So we did the attachments we implemented the attachments by creating a second attachments table and then mapping each attachment back to an original note. And then the final thing you remember we did was create categories. So we create a new category here. Let's create a red category and a green category. If I could spell and type, it would be better. And then if we create another note here, notice we've got our category. So let's add a red note, red button there. Then we've got a red note, and then we can filter all the notes by a given category, so those are only our red notes. And we can have a green notes. We have no green notes. We can return all notes. And then one of the last things we did was the searching, so we can search maybe say by title. And that will return any note which has title within the text of the notes, title or body. So there we go. That's our simple notes app, and that's what we created in the first two parts And just to reiterate, this was a local-based database, so the database is an SQLite database stored in a file right next to our LiveCode stack. So this part of the talk, we're going to go on to moving the database into the cloud. Now, I guess the first question is, why do we want to move our database into the cloud? Well, the cloud provides a central location to store all the data that we want to have in our database. So that means that that can be accessed from any location, and all the same data will be accessed. So what that means is that you can maybe access the database from your phone, from your tablet, from your desktop, and rather than having an individual local database next to your each individual apps on those 3 devices, it contacts a cloud, and you've got the same notes shared across all your 3 apps. Maybe you want to go on holiday or something, you've got a different device, then you can see your same notes from that device overseas without having to create a whole new local database and copy all your notes from one to the next. So that's why. So let's see how. So if you remember from the last time we talked about the structure of our app, you'll notice our sort of 3 layers there: our user interface, then our database library. That's where we abstracted all our database commands into a sort of single, nice, easy to use library, and then had that talk to our FDB, which talked to our SQLite database. Now, the last thing we talked about last time was introducing an intermediate data layer. So I'll quickly go here. So you notice the data layer there sits in between the user interface and libdb. Now, by introducing this intermediate data layer, that creates an abstraction. So what this abstraction is the user interface no longer cares about how the data is stored, whether it's stored in the database, whether it's stored in text files, whether it's stored locally, or whether it's stored in the cloud. All it cares about is how it talks to the data layer. The data layer has a simple API, and our user interface talks to the data layer. The data layer then talks to the actual database itself. Now, why do we want to do that? Well, it means that the data can be stored in any way we want, and we don't really need to change the user interface. So, for example, our local-based app, we can have exactly the same user interface as we had before. We have the data layer, libdb and revdb. If we want to move it to the cloud and have our server-based database, well, we have our user interface talking in exactly the same way to the data layer, but this time the data layer, instead of talking to our local SQLite database, it instead talks over HTTPS to our web service, and then that in turn goes through libdb, revdb into our MySQL database. So that means that our user interface in our same app essentially remains exactly the same as before for our local one, but instead we're talking to a different we implement a different data layer, which in turn will handle with communicating with the web service. So all we need to do is change the data layer. We don't need to change our user interface. It's all nice and neat and simple. So you'll probably notice there, HTTPS, that's the bit in the middle. So let's kind of take a little sidetrack and ask, what is HTTP or HTTPS? Well, HTTP is essentially how your web browser fetches a web page. It's a communication protocol, which is the foundation of World Wide Web, and it's essentially a simple language that allows a client and a server to communicate. So, for example, when you fetch google.com, the client is your web browser and google.com is the server. The client sends a request, the server sends a response. So each request and response is made up of a header and a body. So, for example, when you're fetching google.com, the request header will say, I want to fetch google.com. That tells Google server what you want to fetch, but you have nothing in the body. The body will be empty, and then google.com will return a header and a body, and the body will contain the content of the web page, and the headers that contains any extra sort of meta information. Another example is maybe when you type in a search string. This time, the body of the request will be the search string that you sent. So you're uploading that search string to google.com. It then parses that and returns the information. So that's an example of HTTP. It's a language that the client, your browser, used to communicate with your server. Equally, libURL, which is part of LiveCode, that implements HTTP. So that libURL takes care of creating the HTTP request. It builds the headers, it builds the body, and then sends the request off to google.com. So an additional part of HTTP are the verbs get, post, put, delete. There are a few others. Get and post are the most common, and these verbs are part of the HTTP request header. So you're sending a get request or a post request. So get is when you essentially fetch a simple web page. There's no real extra information there. But post is maybe when you want to post some information. So you're filling out a form, for example, signing up to a website, logging in, or entering your payment details. That information is posted to using the post HTTP verb, and that information is sent out in the request body. So as I say, though, the verbs are stored as part of the HTTP request header. And so you're probably familiar with this, but this will show you how you can use get, post, and the various HTTP verbs in LiveCode. So get URL, that's a simple get request there, and the response is in it, so you put it into the LiveCode site. As I mentioned before, liburl takes care of all the hard work. It takes care of communicating and formatting the HTTP request, builds headers for you, builds a get verb into the header, so it deals with it. And this is exactly the same thing. The second part here, put URL https://livecode.com into TLiveCode site. Although it's using put, don't be confused there. It's still a get request, put URL into a variable, so it stores the contents of livecode.com in our variable TLiveCode site. Next bit is post. So you can see the second line here, post email equals michael@livecode.com, password equals testing, to URL http livecode.com, sign up. So that maybe creates a new user, Michael at livecode.com with the password testing. And you notice here, the first line, set the HTTP headers. I'm telling LiveCode to use a particular header here. This is just a little bit of extra instruction to the server, livecode.com, that the user agent we're using is our LiveCode sign-up app. And the response from the server is stored in the it variable. Like when we used get previously, it's stored in it again. So that's the response of the sign-up process. The next bit is put and delete. As I said, these two are a lot less common. Post and get are the two main ones, but put and delete do exist, and they're part of the LiveCode liburl as well. So if you want to put, you use put and password equals new password into URL http livecode.com users Michael. So this example might be updating my password. And so put, send that form to part of the request body, password equals new password. And this time the response is in the LiveCode property, the URL response. Notice here I'm also checking the result. The result is part of both post and get requests. And that will tell you whether there's been a server error. For example, you've probably seen 404s or 500 server errors, and page not found, or the server's misconfigured. If that happens, the result will not be empty, and the detail of the error will be stored there. And finally, the last one is delete URL, https livecode.com users Michael. Now this doesn't actually delete files on the server, but the actual action is determined by the server. So in this case, it might delete a user from a database there. So it might delete the Michael user from the database. So that's sort of a brief rundown of HTTP, but that's all very well and good. But how does this help us in our cloud app? Well, if you remember our little app breakdown or app diagram, we communicate with the server using HTTP. So we build a web service API that is based on HTTP and handles our requests. So you remember one of our data layer commands or function in this case was fetch note. So this returns all the notes in the database. And we can maybe do this, this is just an example of how it may be done, by getting the contents of the URL api.notes.com and then specifying an action equals fetch notes. Now you notice here question mark action equals fetch notes. These are parameters that you can pass in get requests. So this is still a get request using the get verb, but we're setting an extra parameter, and this is telling our web API that we want to fetch the notes. Now for the moment, just ignore the how this works on the server side. I'll come to that in the later part of the talk. We're purely just considering a very basic client side and creating a basic server-based or cloud-based API. So the notes that are returned by the server are put into T notes, and these are contained within the server's response. So the server side scripts will see the action equals fetch notes. It goes to the database, pulls out all the notes, and then puts the notes into the body. Another example might be creating a new note. This time we might want to post the contents of our note. So notice here, we put title equals %s, body equals %s, and we're using URL and code. Now URL and code is important here. All information that you're going to post to the server in this format, key equals value, in the case title equals so on, body equals so on, need to be URL encoded. That removes any, or it escapes any sequences of characters which are going to confuse things, spaces, for example, or equally the ampersand symbol that might confuse things. Those get replaced with percent encodings, which are then handled by the server. So now we post title equals our new title, body equals our new body, to api.notes.com, and this time the action is create note, and this time the server will see that the action is create note. It will create a new note in our database and return if that succeeded or failed. So that's kind of a very simple web API that we can implement on our server side. But a more common way, or a more modern way, are RESTful APIs, which you've probably heard of, and there's quite a few talks on about it today. Mark's got one, and I believe Greg is also doing a talk on RESTful APIs as well. So what are RESTful APIs? Well, they stands for Representational State Transfer, and it's a standard way, a modern standard way of specifying web-based APIs. Now, all the requests are stateless. That means each request is independent of another, and it uses the HTTP verbs and server-side paths to build or to sort of specify that API. Now, I'll come on to a little bit more detail later, but an example might be sending a GET request to livecode.com/users. That will return a list of all the users, and sending a GET request to livecode.com/users/Michael. That will return a specific user. So you notice the path there, users and users/Michael, that's used to specify our API. That's how we get individual parts of the database in this case, in our case. So let's have a look at our data layer, and let's look at the handlers that were there before. So we had create note, fetch note. Those are obvious. Fetch notes, that returns a list of all the notes. Search notes, that search for specific notes. Filter notes by category as it is, as it suggests. Get all the notes in a given category. Update a note, create a category, and fetch the categories. So that's our data layer, and we want to convert that data layer into a web-based API, a REST API. So how would we do that? Well, I guess the first thing is to consider create note. So here's our server, api.notes.com. It's just an example address, /notes. If we post any data to that, that will create a note. So that's lib data layer create note. We do that by posting to https api.notes.com/notes. We post the data of the note that we want to create. That's sort of like the example we had previously, where we posted the note title and the note body, and that gets handled by the server. Equally, the three sort of fetching notes, where we fetch a given note, we search for particular notes, or we filter the notes by category. We can do that in exactly the same way, api.notes.com/notes. And this time we add the question mark parameters, the get parameters that I talked about earlier, where we pass, if we want to search for a note, a search string, and if we want to filter by a specific category, the category. Next is fetching a particular note. So again, like I mentioned earlier, we build the path on the server to specify the given note that we want to fetch. So this time notes/ID, where ID is the note of the ID of the note that we want to fetch. And this is again a GET request. And if we want to update update a particular note, well, the path is exactly the same, notes/ID, where ID is the ID of the note we want to update. But this time, instead of using the GET verb, we use the PUT verb, and that updates the contents of the given note. So GET request to that path returns the contents of the note. PUT request to that path, well, we put the data into that note, so we update the note. And then the final part of our data layer was categories, and that's exactly the same. We have a categories path, and GET request to /categories gets the notes, and post to /categories. Well, this time we're posting data into that, so that will create a brand new category. So that's marked to our data layer fetch category and data layer create category. So I touched on this briefly earlier, but when you're passing data between the app and server, there's a few things that you need to take into consideration. First of all, we need to URL encode all the get parameters. So back here, get parameters are an example here, $search equals the search term and category equals the category. We can make sure those are all URL encoded so that the information is properly escaped and handled by the server rather than getting a little bit confused with one character, possibly your search string contains ampersand or something like that. So that means that all the characters are properly escaped. And then with the request and response body, well, this time we need to determine how we want to pass the data to the server. So if we go back here, when we're creating a note here, for example, we're posting to libdata create note. We're posting to api.notes.com/notes. We're posting data, but what format is that data? Well, the simplest way, and the way that I showed earlier, was in key value pairs. So title equals ampersand body equals, and the server parses that. Now that works pretty well, but it's a little bit limited. You can't. Maybe you want to specify more complicated data that's a bit more than just key value pairs. For example, we used nested arrays, which are more than just key value pairs, they're subnests. That then becomes a little bit complicated using simple key value pairs. Another option is to use XML, and that works well, but it's a bit bloated and it's a bit of a faff to set up. You need to use Rev XML, and it's often more complicated than it really needs to be. A nice way is to use the array encode and array decode. So for example, say we want to format our note as a nested array. So the first element is, we have a title element, we have a body element, and then we have a sub-array of attachments and a sub-array of categories. We can just use array encode. The array encode function within LiveCode takes a LiveCode array and serializes it into a binary string that gets posted up to the server, and the server side then runs array decode, and that decodes that binary string back into a LiveCode array, and that works nicely. And that's a really good way if your client and your server are both implemented in LiveCode. So as you see, that's maybe not so portable. Now it's fine if it's, as I say, a LiveCode app, both on client and server side, but you might come into contact with third-party APIs which are written in another language, and they'll probably use a more standard format, and that could be XML, it could be key value pairs, or more commonly these days, JSON. Now JSON is just a way of encoding data, exactly the same or very similar to array encode and array decode, but it's kind of slightly human readable. And within LiveCode we have the functions JSON to array and array from JSON, and that will do exactly as they say, convert a LiveCode array to JSON, and from a JSON blob convert that back into a LiveCode array. So when you send data to the server, you'll call array from JSON to array. Array from JSON, and then on the server side you'll call JSON to array, which will decode it back to that should be array to JSON and JSON to array, excuse me, that's why I was confusing myself. So array to JSON will take a LiveCode array and encode it into JSON, and JSON to array will do the exact opposite. It will take a JSON blob and convert it back to a LiveCode array. So on the client side, you'll run array to JSON, and on the server side, you'll run JSON to array. And that will make sure that you've posted all the data up correctly, so the server then sees that you want to create a note with a given set of attachments, a given set of categories, and a title and a body. The final part to be aware of is make sure that you encode in base64, encode any binary data. That just alleviates any problems that you might get with binary data in URLs. It's not strictly necessary, but it's good practice, and will stop you getting tripped up later on. So let's see. Now we've kind of specified our API. How do we actually use that? Well, let's consider fetching notes. Now remember, that was a GET request to api.notes.com/notes. So here we do put URL notes.com api.notes.com/notes entity response. Check the result to make sure that the result is not empty, and to make sure there's no error occurred. And then you notice I'm using this function libURL last RHH headers. That tells that gives you the headers that the server sent back. And one thing that the server can send in this the headers is the content type header. That basically says the data that we're sending back has been JSON encoded. So if the content type is application/JSON, then we know that the server's given us JSON data, and we need to convert that data back into a LiveCode array, which we then return back to our UI. So the data layer API here, libDataLayer fetch notes, that's exactly the same as it was with our local app, but in this time, instead of querying our SQLite database, this time we call a URL to get the contents of the cloud database, decode that contents, and return it. So the UI doesn't know any different. For all it cares, it could be a local database, it could be a text-based database, it could be an XML database, it could be a cloud database. All it's doing is fetching, calling libDataLayer. And then the final part is creating a note, or the final part that I'll show here is creating a note. Now remember, I mentioned before, it's good to base 64 encode all our binary data. So in this case, these are our images or attachments. So make sure we base 64 encode. Then build our array that we want to pass to the server. So we put our title in the title field, body in the body field, our array of attachments into the attachments, and our list of categories into the categories field. Then make sure we encode our array to JSON, and then build a request body, put that into our request body. Notice that we're setting the HTTP headers property. This is exactly the same as we've seen previously, but this time rather than the server telling us that we're receiving JSON, we're telling the server that we're sending JSON. So we're setting the content type to application/JSON, and then post that up to the server. The URL is exactly the same, but this time instead of being a GET request, it's a POST request. Check result, and then if all's gone well, return the empty string to let our UI know that everything has worked as desired. So that's how we create a note, and that's how we fetch a note. So let's go back to our app. Now here's our local app, and you'll notice this is our libDataLayer stack here that we had previously. So let's see, create note. This does very similar to our previous function, but this time it calls libdb insert, i.e. it's inserting into the local database. Now if I go over to here, this is our cloud-based app, and this time if I go to libDataLayer create note, instead of calling libdb insert, it builds our array like we had before, but this time it sends a post request. Now you'll notice that I've abstracted all our HTTP requests into a sort of nice little handler. So we specify the request type method, so that's get, post, put, delete. So if we go back to create note, we call send request, post request. This is a path. Path is just notes. The request body, that's the data that we want to post. And then the final parameter is any get parameters that we want to send. So that's any kind of parameters that are part of the URL, remember, question mark. Now I've got our server APIs, unfortunately not api.notes.com, but it's hosted on my OnRev account for our example. First thing it does, as I mentioned before, we URL encode all our get params. So get params are just an array. We've not got any in this case. These are put into part of the URL using the question mark, so that's the final part of the URL. The previous part is our michael.onrev.com/LC global, and then ppath. So ppath in this case is notes. So our request is michael.onrev.com/LC global/notes. Next thing we want to do is, if the body data that we're posting up, in this case we're posting the note we want to create, is an array, then we want to make sure that our array is properly encoded. So we call array to JSON, and also set the HTTP headers to application/JSON, telling the server that we're posting up JSON data. And then the final part is the actual sending of the request. So in this case, get, post, put, delete. Here we're using a post request, post it there, check the result, and then put the response into tResponse. If the result is not empty, i.e. we've encountered an error, throw that error, and then we'll handle that in create note in the try catch block here. And then, oops daisy. And then the final part is decode the content or the response sent by the server. And like we did before, we use libURL last RHH headers, put that into our response headers, and then check to see if it's JSON. In this case, if it is JSON, then put that back to an array. Use it, and then return the response. Now, the content type could actually be anything, and in theory, we could check the content type. So it could, instead of being application/JSON, it could be application/XML, in which case we might decode XML. It could be, as I mentioned, LiveCode arrays, or serialized LiveCode arrays, in which case we'll call array decode. But for now, we're really only considering JSON. So let's see how that works in our little app. So now this is our cloud-based app. Click New. Remember, our UI is completely unchanged. All that's changed is the web data layer. So let's create a note title. And then click. It should create our new note, and there's our note there. We can now edit our note. If I double click, hopefully. Should do. Let me check. Oh. Try that again. API error. It's appeared to frozen. Let me restart LiveCode here. Sure, there. Okay, here's your note. Now if I double click on it, hopefully it should allow us to edit it. I'm not entirely sure what went wrong there. I think our internet connection is a little dodgy with performing a webinar at the same time as everything else that's going on in the office. So we can edit our note, click tick, and that should hopefully then show our edits. And we can do exactly as before, create a new category, and that should appear in the list of categories. Give it a second to update. Oops. I think our internet connection is somewhat slow up here, unfortunately. Let's see if it's working. Oh, yeah, so we've got an error here which I've not handled properly, which means that the previous request was still executing, which is, yeah, means that I'm not handling the errors properly in our data layer library, which is my fault because I didn't take care of the errors all correctly. Which means that I'm just blindly returning the result here rather than actually handling the case where so when I'm fetching the categories, you can see that I'm returning key error rather than actually handling the error correctly. In this case, I was sending two HTTP requests simultaneously because our office Wi-Fi is a little slow up here. But you kind of get the basic picture. Let me restart our app. So let me send it here. So yeah, we can see that our red category is now there. Had I waited properly, it would have been there. So we now can create a new note and our red category will be there. similarly, we can attach images and assign categories and search like we did in our cloud and our local app. So let's go back to our slides. Where are you? And let's see, what do we need to do to actually build our server-side API? Well, the main thing we need is a server. Naturally, in this case, I'm using my OnRev account, but it could be Google Cloud, Amazon Web Servers, any kind of third-party hosting service provider, or you may indeed have your own dedicated server, in which case you can use that. You need to use a database. It could be MySQL, Postgres, SQL Server, anything really, as long as it's an SQL database and it's installed on your server, then it'll be fine to run with LiveCode. And finally, you need a scripting language to actually do all the work server side. Now, it could be PHP, Java, Ruby. There's several that are out there now, but in our case, we'll use LiveCode, which means that we can use exactly the same code on our client app as we did in our server app. So let's see, how do we create our database? Well, the first thing is it can't be done dynamically like we did with our SQL-like database. Where we did on startup, we created it dynamically. That's really, the server doesn't allow that kind of thing. You need to kind of create one database, but you create a database and configure it once for all users, and it's accessed by a username and password, and the schema will need to be tweaked for each database type. So we had quite a specific we had the schema specific for. If you remember our schema from before, it was specific for SQLite. I've tweaked it slightly, so now it works with MySQL. The tweaks are minor. Most bits here are the primary key and varchar types, which are specific to MySQL, but the basic schema is exactly the same. So what I'll do is I'll quickly show you how you can create a database using your OnRev account, if you happen to have one. When you log into OnRev cPanel, this is what you'll see. And you can click on MySQL databases. I'll create a new database. My OnRev account is called Michael, so all databases that I create will be prefixed with Michael underscore. I'll call it LiveCode Global, C Global. Create that database. Next thing we do is we need to create a user. Scroll down. I'll call the user exactly the same thing, and I'll just let it generate a password for us. Copy that for later. And we'll now create the user. And then the final part of the puzzle is to map the user to the database. So we give our new Michael LC Global user access to the Michael LC Global database. So we add that user. We need to give them all privileges so they can create tables, they can insert tables, they can delete records, and so on and so forth. Make the changes, and there we go. So now we have a brand new LC Global database. Next thing we need to do is pre-populate our database with our database schema. So clicked on the PHP MyAdmin, that's a simple way to see the contents of your database. And what I'll do is I'll get our schema. First thing I'll do though is so I don't forget it, and then I'll copy this. So that's our database schema. Then the left hand side here you'll see my new LC Global database. There's nothing in it at the moment, so if I click on SQL and run this list of SQL, go, and here we see our tables, our attachment table, our categories table, our notes table, and our table which maps notes to categories. So that's the first part. We've created our simple server-side database. So now that we've got our server-side database, the next thing we need to do is start developing our app. So we need to set up our API. Now you remember the RESTful APIs, they're all path-based. So typically when you create a website, each individual path is handled by a specific file. So do we want to create a specific script for each path, or what about dynamic paths? These are ones which change each time. So those are ones which have, like, for example, the ID of our notes. That's going to be different for each note. We can't create a file for each individual, a file on the server that will handle that path for each individual note. That doesn't really make any sense. But what you can do is configure all requests to a given directory to point to a single file. Now, this is going to be specific to the type of server you've got. OnRev runs using Apache, so Apache, you use the htaccess file. Now, I won't go into too much detail into this. It's specific to each server, and really it's kind of one thing you write once and then never care about it again. But what this little blob of code here does is redirects all the requests within the given folder that this file exists to api.lc. So that means that we just need to write a single server-side script that will exist in api.lc that deals with our web-based API. Now, if you remember our little server structure before, this is our server side. The top layer we have our web service. That will be api.lc, that's our LiveCode script. Sitting below that is libdata layer, and it's libdb and revdb. Now, the nice thing about using LiveCode is this is all written in LiveCode server, and our libdata layer, libdb, and naturally revdb, those are all exactly the same as our data layer libraries and our database libraries that existed for our client-side app. So these are completely unchanged. This time, instead of executing locally though, they're executing on the server. And the only real change we need to do is tell libdb to talk to a MySQL database rather than a SQLite database. So a little bit about LiveCode server programming. I'll show you an example in a second, but all LiveCode server files have the .lc extension, or typically the main files do. You can use LiveCode stacks using the start using command, but main ones have the .lc extension. And you put LiveCode scripts within this angle brace question mark LC blocks. I'll show you what that means. And they're just text files with LiveCode script within them. You can include subscripts, or essentially our library scripts, using the include command. So that allows us to include our data layer and our database library just using include. And the scripting language is absolutely identical to the LiveCode desktop programming language, which is a great bonus for us because it means we have to do very little to get our client app, our local app, up into the cloud. So let's have a look. Here's our htaccess file. The way you get that up onto the server is using FTP. This here is FileZilla. It's an FTP client. There's several of them around, and you can use your own one. And I've got my htaccess file here locally. I can then upload it using FTP, using FileZilla, to our LC global, my OnRev server in the LC global subdirectory. And then I've already uploaded that and our api.lc file. I mean that all the content is redirected to api.lc because of our htaccess file. Now let's have a look at api.lc. I include a library called restapi.lc using the include command, as I mentioned. Notice the question mark, angle bracket question mark LC. That means that this is a LiveCode server script. I also include our data layer, which our data layer is a sub-library. It's just in the libs folder there. Let's just quickly go to our data layer. You'll notice that our data layer is the functionality here is exactly identical to our local lib data layer. The only difference is this little line here at the top. We connect to a MySQL database on localhost. So we created our one. We created our database. This is the database name. LC Global. LC Global. This is Atom that's throwing these errors, which is rather annoying. Needs updated. Our database name is LC Global. Our username is Michael_LC Global. And our password, we copied and pasted that before over here. So we'll copy and put our password in. So that's as simple as it is to connect to your database. Save that, and if we want to upload that, go to libs, and then upload our data layer, which is now pointing to our LC global database. So as I mentioned before, our data layer here is exactly the same. So the way you access a database on the server is exactly the same way you access a local database. We're just using our database library, calling libdb insert, libdb fetch array there, libdb update, and so on. So that's completely unchanged. And as is libdb, libdb is exactly the same as the local libdb. So that's a great advantage of using LiveCode. Nothing here has changed. So let's go back to api.lc. Now, I created a simple REST API library. What this does is, rather than having to go through and parse each individual path, which is stored in this variable here, $_getPath, we can register handlers for a given path. So it's pretty simple, and it just makes things a lot more easy and convenient. I won't go through how it implemented. I'll upload the code and you can see there, it's fairly trivial. But what this does is, I'm registering handler create note for path notes when the HTTP method is post. Equally, I'm registering the handler update note for the path notes /star. In this case, star, that matches to anything. So this is when we're updating a note. If you remember, the update method was put into URL notes /123, where 123 is the ID of our note. Similarly, fetch note is when you call when you send a GET request to the same URL, so notes /123, that will get the content of note 123. Fetch notes, that's just the path notes, and the GET request. Create category is post to the categories path, and fetch categories is get to the categories path. And then what we do is call handler for path. So basically all that does is looks in this method here, command rather, looks for the list of handlers that have been registered and calls the appropriate one for the given path. So in this case, create note is an example, and it calls it with 3 parameters: the path parameters, the get parameters, and the actual body. And all we do with the create note handler is call lib data layer create note, pass the body title, body, and body attachment, so the list of attachments and a list of categories to our lib data layer, and then return the result. So it's exactly the same as we had in the server on our client side app. This time though, we're just sort of going through this little REST API intermediate layer. Update note is exactly the same. Notice this time though, we're using path params _1, so that's what maps to this wildcard character, gets put in the first parameter. If you have several wildcard parameters, in that the second wildcard will get put in path params _2. So in this case, path params, the first param is the ID of the note, so we put that there, and then we take the title and the body out of the request body. And if you remember lib data layer, update note, you pass the ID, the title, and the body. So that's as simple as it is to build our REST API. This little REST API library that I've created makes it really easy. Rather than you having to go through and parse the path by hand, it just deals with it all for you, and you can just register handlers for given paths. So let's see if I can close down LiveCode.
Just a little mention, Michael, that you are very close to time here. So.
Well, we're pretty much done in this regard, because that's showing pretty much everything that is involved in creating a cloud app. So I'll now load it up. So this time we should be pointing to our newly created database. So I'll show you what happens when we create a note with our new database as LiveCode starts up. Hopefully it will start up eventually.
While you're waiting, there's a couple of little questions you might want to consider here. Devon has asked, I might have missed something. Where is, REST API register handler for path and method defined. Uh-oh. I think we actually might have lost my... Yeah.
A simple library. It's not that long, but all it does is register. It sort of builds an array of all the handlers that you've specified for the given paths and the given methods, and then call handler for path parses through that array and looks for the handlers, and if it finds that handler, it calls dispatch to call it with the various parameters that are there. I won't go through exactly how it works because we're running out of time, but it's, as you can see, there's not too much to it. It's fairly straightforward, and it makes building REST APIs a lot easier rather than having to go through by hand and parse the path. You can just register handlers for the given path.
You might want to turn your video back on as well.
Oh, you might turn. Oh, sorry. You go back.
There we go. Okay.
Another question?
I think there was another question. Let me just look back down here. I'm pretty sure Jonathan asked, how can we use LiveCode server to interface with a web-based database that serves millions of users and millions of records?
To use LiveCode server? Well, you can do exactly the same thing as we've done with our local and client app, our local and cloud app. So you can call, if that's a third-party database that gives you access to it, it will probably have an API that gives you access. So it will have probably a REST API, most commonly these days. In exactly the same way as we've created an API, we can then call somebody else's API, and we can do that directly from LiveCode server in exactly the same way we've done with our local app here by calling put URL, get URL, post into URL, and so on. That's so that means that you can, REST APIs are standard, and you can call them from anywhere, from local apps or the server as well. So, for example, if you want to do it server side, you can call a REST API that's developed by third-party clients. And the good thing about that is because it's a standard, you don't really care how it's implemented. As long as you can access the API with the given credentials, you can call it from LiveCode server. So if it's written in PHP, Ruby, or whatever, you can still call that API from LiveCode using the get URL, post URL commands.
Cool. So Arthur is asking, can this be generalized and wrapped as a generic cloud framework?
Yeah, so that if you want, that's certainly possible. The main thing is the main two parts that are probably reusable are that little handler that I wrote in Web Data Layer, which called, which sort of abstracted the calling of remote handlers. So if you remember, you passed the method post, you passed the path that you wanted to call, and then the contents that you wanted to do that. You could reuse that within your own app. And then the final part that's probably most useful is if you want to build an API. Sorry, I'm realizing I'm not sharing my screen anymore, but if you want to build an API, you can use that little REST API library that I wrote, and that will allow you to create a REST API to your own specifications in exactly the same we did. So yeah, it could be wrapped into sort of a generic framework. Now Mark's talking about LC Connect and upcoming talk today, I believe. So he'll probably have a bit more information. LC Connect is essentially designed for exactly this. It allows you to wrap third-party web APIs, REST APIs, using LiveCode without too much effort.
Well, that's great. I don't think there were any more. I don't see any more questions, and we are also out of time. So I need to wrap you up.
Yep. I'll put all the code up online so you can see it and review it later.
Yeah, I think people will be really keen to see that, and I know lots of comments about how interesting this is, so that's very cool. Yeah, so I'm going to shut this room down, and then I'm going to start again, and we have Kevin up next for his monthly report, which I know he's very much looking forward to. So I'll see you all again in a couple of minutes. Okay, folks, I think we are back. Just checking. If we can just have a confirmation again that you guys can. Oh, goodness. What's going on now? Aha, you can see me. Okay, good. Something a little odd happened there, but it's okay. We're all good. Excellent. I'm here with Kevin. And I am just going to hand it straight over to him, and he's going to tell you all about what we have been doing this month. Here we go.
Hello and a very warm welcome to month 3 of the LiveCode monthly report. I'm Kevin Miller, LiveCode CEO, and this recording has been created in the last day or so it is completely up to date. When I get to the end of the recorded segment, we will switch over to the live channel, which will allow both Mark and myself to take your questions. I'm going to start by doing a recap of notable events over the course of the last month or so. One of the most exciting events that we had this past month was that we launched LiveCode for FM, or LiveCode for FileMaker. For those of you that aren't aware, LiveCode for FM is a version of LiveCode that plugs into the FileMaker database app development environment, and it allows you full access to the FileMaker database, as well as the ability to run complicated LiveCode-based user interfaces and user experiences. So myself, Mark and Chris went to the FileMaker DevCon in Phoenix, Arizona a couple of weeks back, and you can see us in the picture here being bagpiped into the evening reception. Some of you may have seen that video already on YouTube. I think my working theory is that Heather and Stephen dreamed this activity up for us to do because they didn't get to go to the show themselves. Joking aside, it actually worked really well because it meant that everybody knew who we were, and we flew the flag quite literally, in fact, on that first night, and we stayed in our kilts for the entire event, and that meant that people were able to find us very easily, and we got the chance to speak to lots and lots of people throughout the show. So that was a really good experience. Very friendly, very welcoming community, and it's been really great to ship the first version of that product. I gave a vendor talk at the event, and some of those vendor talks aren't always massively well attended, but I was really pleased because the room was completely full. In fact, we had people sitting on the floor, standing, and by the time I got started, people were getting turned away. So I think I'll have to ask the organisers for a larger room next year. So a lot of interest in what we do, and it's interesting because LiveCode is positioned in a very similar way to FileMaker, because if you think about it, FileMaker is an easy to use tool for building data-driven applications. It's good at certain types of data experience, and it's simpler and more straightforward than some of the more traditional database products. And LiveCode is kind of the same thing for the programming world. So it's the same idea. It's about making app development more accessible. It's about being able to build richer native apps that integrate with the operating system, apps that integrate with other systems, apps that have complex workflows and user experiences. And you put those two things together, and you've got really a very powerful solution. And we got speaking to a lot of really big, solid FileMaker consulting companies over the course of the days that we were there, and lots of interest. So it's really exciting to see growth from that space. So back home, the team have been very busy indeed. This is Panos's slide from the team meeting, and you'll see from that list at the top there that Panos came out with, the team as a whole, but Panos reported that we had built no less than 6 releases over the course of the month. So a big well done to the entire team for all of the work on all of those different releases. And looking at the statistics there, you can see in the yellow that we had 64 confirmed bugs over the course of the month, and 104 that moved to resolved fixed. So very much winning the quality battle there. Very pleased about that. Unfortunately, we didn't quite get LiveCode 9 DP9 done. I was really hoping to have that for you today. I've been trying to have some new tech for you with each one of these monthly reports, but unfortunately, between various staff holidays over the summer and the trip to Phoenix and the FileMaker launch and so on, it was all just too much, and we didn't quite get there. It is, however, it is almost there, and I will be able to demo some of what is going into it presently. There's a couple of exciting features that I'm going to show off in a little while. Every month we aim to interview a new customer, whether you're a large customer or a small customer, or from any of the various different sectors that use LiveCode. And I'm really delighted this month to be able to interview Todd at Digital Pomegranate. Most of you will be aware already, but Digital Pomegranate is a relatively new company that's both builds its own apps and does services, and it's very much got LiveCode at its heart. And Digital Pomegranate landed Sony as a customer a few months back, and the big news is that just in the last few days, their new Sony app has just gone live into the App Store, in both the iOS App Store and the Android App Store. So Stephen has interviewed Todd for you this month. This interview was taken yesterday. Todd was in the airport, but I think the audio has come out okay. You can hear it. You can hear it fine. It's a great interview because Todd talks about how he landed. What does it take to land a customer like Sony, and why was LiveCode such a good fit, and what did it take to get a customer like Sony to be willing to adopt LiveCode? And so he talks about it from a number of different angles, and I hope that there's something for everybody to take from this, and for everybody to learn something from this interview. So let me switch over to that.
Hey Todd, how are you doing?
Hey, how are you?
Yeah, doing very well, thank you. Thanks for joining me. You're in the airport, or?
Yeah, I'm in the airport, sunny Florida. We're working on our next big thing for LiveCode. We're doing a tourist app. So we're
Nice.
we're doing walking tours for all kinds of cities. Our next launch is going to be Harlem. We work with the city of New York in the Harlem district, and so we're doing walking tours. We're also going to be working in Florida, everywhere from China, Japan, Europe. So that's our next big project in LiveCode.
Great. Well, for those watching that are not aware, Todd's the CEO of Digital Pomegranate. He's a team of LiveCode developers. I think he has about 4 or 5 full-time LiveCode developers working on some pretty large projects, the most recent one being Sony. Just before we jump in, I want to kind of go back to something that you messaged me about not so long ago, Todd, and it's kind of what got us quite excited. You said something like, "Hey Steve, we're working on this project. It's going to be a big one. I think like Sir Paul McCartney might even be a beta tester." And I'm thinking, what's going on here? What's all this about? And then you told me it was Sony, and then so I guess tell me about this project. What's the purpose of this app? What does it do?
So basically, Sony has different divisions. You have Sony Music, Sony Movies, and you'll have what's called Sony AVT. And what it does is it actually processes the royalty payments to the songwriters and the music publishers and things of this nature. If you, a lot of times recently in the news, you've seen Paul McCartney actually they had some litigation issues. So essentially, Michael Jackson had owned a large music library of the rights to all the Beatles and all this other stuff. So this company essentially is an extension of that. So every time you buy a CD, every time a radio plays a song, every time you listen on Spotify, every time you buy something from iTunes, or you're in a TV commercial or a movie, or anywhere you even reference the likeness, you have to pay a royalty. So you essentially pay a royalty to the songwriters, the producers, the musicians, and all that, the whole 9 yards. So if you think about it, it's a real enormously complex system, because not only first you have to track of all the way that you're bringing the money in, then you have to then divide it by everyone who gets a royalty payment, that gets a royalty payment, and how you have to pay that out.
Okay. This is what the app is. This is what the app's solving?
Exactly. So they have an application called Score. So Score essentially manage that entire process. And then what they, so they have a massive database of, tens of millions of records every day. And then what they really wanted to do was they wanted to make it accessible, just like everyone else. So that's where LiveCode came in, and which was really perfect. So we worked with them to create a REST API so that they could expose the data that we're really looking for. A lot of people use the term big data. So this is really big data. So this essentially is going to be the largest music business app in the world. And when you're talking about testers, not only was it Paul McCartney, things like Lady Gaga, all these sort of things. And it was really funny getting an email going, well, Lady Gaga doesn't like the way that this, that the dashboard doesn't open up, and, that type of thing. And, or, so-and-so doesn't think it's a little bit slow. Can you do something in different languages in different countries? Remember, this is the world. They essentially are #1 in the world. So that means you're doing like Spanish music, K-pop, all of that. And they pay a royalty payments for all of that.
Wow, that's quite an email to get. I can't imagine seeing something like that. Okay, you mentioned that you use REST API, and I'm sure there's some other cool features that you guys worked on in this app. Talk a little bit about some of those features, or maybe some of the challenges that you faced.
Well, when you talk about big data, you're really talking about getting to the data. So there's two ways to do the big data. One is the backend, where you're processing it, you're storing it in a database, whether it's a massive mainframe or Oracle, or those type of big, massive data storages. Then you have a middleware that sort of like processes it, kind of like does the analytical work on it, and then you need to present it to people. And the great thing about LiveCode was you're able to take that middleware, and essentially these companies are like, hurry up and wait. You pitch them and you talk to them, and you're talking for 6 months, and they're like, okay, great, you got it. We want the app in 4 months.
Yeah.
So we're like, well, why are we waiting like a year to 6 months where we're talking? And they're like, well, we've talked about it, now you should be done. So it's like, hurry up and wait, because, we've already told our stakeholders that, we're ready to go with this. So they're all ready to go now. And then that's where a tool like LiveCode comes in, because then what you can do is when they say go, you really have to be ready to go. The other thing which is really great about LiveCode that helps us out is the visuals. And they have, when you do big data, you have what's commonly called as a drill down dashboard. Like, it's a multi-tier. Like, you want to come in and you want to say, here's my see it at multi-views. Like, when you pick Spotify, you want to see what's trending in Spotify, where we're getting most of my revenue, who's buying what CDs, who's buying what type of music, are they buying specific songs? So you want to look at from the specific aspect of Spotify, like under Spotify, what's playing. Then you want to go to you want to look at it, same thing with a different view. You want to look at an album, and you want to say, where's the traffic for this album? Is it more sales? Is it more streaming services? If it's something's a real big kick, is it TV commercial, and what's the exposure? Because then you can essentially link up, like, for example, if Apple picks up a song, and then boom, you would be able to start hearing, you need to present it to the user to say, look, now all of a sudden it's starting to stream, and then that's turning into sales. And your job as an app is to connect the dots. And the great thing about, for us, is the LiveCode groups. Because when you're using something like, Objective-C or your even in Java and things like this, they have great pre-existing widgets, which is really wonderful. But to customize those widgets and get a real specific UI that you're looking for is a tremendous amount of work. Whereby LiveCode, you just put everything you need in groups, you clone those groups, and then you set the parent, and you can create a 4 or 5 level deep interactive data modeling system within nanoseconds. As a matter of fact, this app actually, because it basically breaks itself out, it inevitably, it only starts with 2 cards. And everything is built dynamic, including the cards, all of the data model, all of the data that comes in, even the maps. So we, one of the first requirements they had was an interactive map.
Yeah. Okay. Very nice.
So,
it sounds amazing. It sounds like LiveCode was probably the right tool for the job. Yeah.
It was, and to be honest with you, we actually did it sort of in 2 ways. We also looked at, to be perfectly blunt, was looking at in React Native, and really one of the interesting things with React Native is that of course these are they actually have attorneys that actually read the the actual the agreements, in a sense, of what you have to do. And one of the most interesting thing was they had a real issue with the licensing. Is essentially Facebook has the right to all your code.
Oh, okay, wow.
So they were like, well, that's not going to happen. That's not an option. And the great thing about LiveCode was it was open source. We were able to get them to download the open source version of LiveCode, take a look at it. They were like, okay. And then they had a full commercial version, which is the main thing that they're looking for.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Great, really impressive. Now, one thing that springs to mind with an app like this, and you've got all of the data for all these the biggest music artists in the world, security must have been a real kind of top of the checklist.
They had more security people than we had programmers.
I can imagine.
Yeah, the security was about a 2-month process, because you have to remember, a year and a half ago, Sony Pictures was hacked. And their CEO ended up moving on, and they had a lot of issues. So they are on real security lockdown from a corporate perspective. So yeah, they put us through the real ringer. One of the greatest solutions for that was, because backend was backend. That wasn't really the aspect about LiveCode. The best thing that we really did is we used the base built-in encryption with LiveCode. The second thing, which actually really saved us a lot, was we didn't save that much data to the phone.
Okay.
Very, very little data. And so one of the things we were going through, we started creating some temporary tables and putting that data in a folder, sort of even just to redo sorts and things like this. They came back to us with, boom, here's a flaw, here's a flaw, here's a flaw, here's a flaw, here's a vulnerability, here's a vulnerability. And then, once you have this file, can the person a little bit more Android than iOS, someone can, reference your SQLite file and put in injections or whatever that may be. Even if they're saying it's really difficult, it's a potential. It's a potential, it's a potential, it's a potential. And, when you get pages and pages and pages of yellow points, you're like, how to solve all of this? You're like, forget it. Let's not save it. Let's just keep it in memory array, and we can do the sorting in memory and things like that. And that was the great thing in LiveCode with just great full text search and things like that. Allowed us to pull the data down, and we did everything in memory. Great.
Now, one thing I'm sure a lot of people listening would be quite interested to know, and I'm sure you could do a whole session on this. How do you win a contract with a company like Sony?
Patience. Patience. So but that's a great question. So, because I think a lot of people, they look at LiveCode, and there's really two types of people that really, the companies and the programmers that I've met. The first type of programmer is someone that has their own app, right? Mm-hmm. And I haven't really met, I've met a few, but I haven't met a lot of people that do a lot of full-time contract work with LiveCode, which is a real shame. I think that we need to focus and do more. So what we try to do is we balance the two. And so one of the first aspects is if you're just doing contract work, one of the great things to do is do your own app. You know, because when you're going to do a pitch, you're going to do something, one of the first things they're going to ask you is, you know, all right, let's go through your portfolio. Okay? These are the things that we're going to need. So you're going to need to have a portfolio. So if you're just getting off using LiveCode or something like this, my first suggestion to you is get some kind of simple app in the App Store, show that you can get the whole process going and things like this. You know, you've got to get something out, done, prove that you can get it out, and let's move on. And the second thing is go get some contract work. You know, even if you do your own app, and we do a lot of our own products and everything, we always still go out and get contract work. Our goal is somewhere about 50-50. Now, why do we get contract work? It's because it forces us to learn, and we learn it. Like we would never, to be perfectly blunt, we would never go through the security that they made us go through. But it really taught us, and it pushes us and pushes and pushes and pushes, and you learn, and you correct your own function modules. Okay? Plus, it's all kinds of new technology. Now, you know, they're bringing in new things. They want us to do, you know, a certain type of OAuth. They want us to they want to do finger, you know, for iOS. They want to do the finger login, and you know, all these different things that we haven't really done, and they pay you to do it.
Yeah.
And they will check, and they will. So it's a great way to, in a sense, go to school. So now back to your question, how do you pitch it? So once you get a good portfolio, you just have to go in, and if you prove it, there's really only 3 things that they're really looking for. You know, can they trust you? So when you go to do your pitch, it really has to be about trust, because when especially if you're, whether even a big company or a small company, big a little bit more, they're going to sit down, they're going to tell you the you know, hit by the bus mentality. So the first thing they're going to bring in, and you need to be aware that they're going to ask you that, and you have to come in and say, you know, here's my team, even if it's 2 people. You know, someone like Sony is not going to hire one individual. They're just not going to do that. So if you're just by yourself, you know, I'm going to be perfectly blunt with you. You know, you're not going to get that contract. They don't, you know, they're not going to maintain a system with 400,000 people off of one person. It's not going to happen. But if you do have a team, you present even 2 or 3 people, they're fine with it. Present your team, present their experiences, present it. Go it, talk about how you do it and how you can unify. The second thing you want to do is they realize price. You would think even a company like Sony, price is an issue, okay? So they will do it. You just have to prove that you can, you know, even be 50% of the price and things like this, and they're interested in it, okay? Then the second thing that you really got to do is you have to be willing to take a jump, a leap of faith. So the way that we did, and this contract was, it was basically, look, we will do it. If you like it, pay us. If you don't, then we'll eat it. And that's what we had to do. You know, in a case like this was, listen, you'll do it. We'll work with you to do it. They had hired a UI team to go ahead and design the whole UI. And then I was like, look, we'll do it. We'll start it all right now. When we're done, if you like it, you'll get it. If not, then I'll take it as a learning experience.
Wow, that's some incredible advice in there, and I think that's going to be quite useful to a lot of people. So you talked a little bit about going in with a team. I'm interested, how many people did you have working on this project?
So one of the first things, once we decided to get the project, again, they gave us a general overview. You know, when you're dealing with a company like Sony, you don't really get to do the full UI. They're going to give you the general overview. They're going to give you their branding. They're going to give you the color schemes. They're going to give you the fonts. They're going to give you a lot. So you don't have a lot of flexibility that you would on your own. But then the first thing, they're going to just give you the general overview, and you've got to get back to them. Now, what we normally do, we're very different than a lot of other live coders. Most of the people basically get the general specs and they start building everything in LiveCode. We don't do that. And we don't even wireframe everything. We build pixel perfect wireframe, if you will, in Photoshop.
Okay.
So when we lay out everything in Photoshop, every single screen, every single functionality, everything, and we went back to them with the second round. We went with them with everything laid out. Now, once everything got laid out, then we're very different than I think a lot of other LiveCode shops. We don't design off of cards. Everything we do is in script.
Okay.
So we don't drag and drop. We don't do card layouts. We don't do anything like that. Everything we do is in modules. So we do is we break them up into a particular type of object. We create a substack for it, and we create a script-only substack, because we can also then put all of that in GitLab. That solves the other problem for us, so that we can do, like, we have a big international team. We just opened up an office in Hong Kong. So we have Hong Kong, we have Armenia, we have the US, we have Florida, we have a few other ones. And we also have now in Silicon Valley. So how do we do all of that share is we have to use GitLab. And if we're going to use LiveCode, then we have to use text-only script. So for that, all of our team members can do it. So we take the UI, we then code it, and then boom. And then once you really start coding it, you'll find to get from your concept, your Photoshop, to actually a working app is about 3 weeks.
Right, okay, wow. Wow, very impressive.
And the key thing is, and this is why you also want to do contract work, you'll start to pull some. Like, for example, they came to us, and they're like, one of the core things they wanted was an interactive map. It had to have pinch and zoom, and they had to be able to click a country, and we were struggling with, we decided to do a web browser, because we really couldn't get the pinch and zoom, what we were looking for, like that real-time pinch and zoom in LiveCode with SVG and things. It just wasn't working out. So what we ended up, we create the HTML on the fly and put it in the browser.
Okay.
So we were able to get that. So we coded all that, and then we pulled the objects out. So when you click on the object, it actually pulls the SVG out, and then we convert that SVG and we display it on another card.
Nice.
Yeah, so all of that was all done in code.
Okay, so you kind of mentioned just a little while back there some of the things that are maybe coming up for the Sony app. What sort of, is that something you're working on now? What are some of the features that they're requesting?
Well, yeah, and the great thing, and it's good for LiveCode, is when you get a company like Sony, and this is a part of the issues, and everyone needs to hear it, is that when they pick you, it's a relationship, it's a marriage, let's call it, some people understand. It is really a long-term marriage, because for them, their investment, even though they might be paying you, their investment, in terms of marketing, like Sony is getting a Billboard magazine, the music magazine, and a bunch of other ones. Their ads for the app alone are probably somewhere about $250,000. Just the ads to promote the app. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, they're in it 7 figures. They're to get this app out the door, marketed, tested, everything they're in it at $1 million. So, they are looking for a really, really long-term relationship. And for LiveCode, that means also to train new people. And they were hesitant at first, but once you get in, you show them that it's really, really easy to use, and you show the people that the mock-up languages and things like that. So they will also invest and train people. That long-term relationship is what really sort of goes. Now, then once that long-term relationship is established, then they're going to start doing things, and they're going to start feeding it back. They're already starting to feed back to us, like the fingerprint. They also want to do a new way. There's a new system that you can request, as a finance company. Actually, I think David Bowie started, if you remember. He actually sold the rights to his royalties, and then he sold them as bonds, and then people were they pre-bought his bonds. They pre-bought his royalty in the forms of a bond. Okay. So that actually has been a new finance thing. So what people want to do is, because we contract the royalties, if a songwriter wants to get some money, they can actually finance their royalties, and they want to be able to essentially make it like an ATM. They basically want to come in and say, we send them the data, they know what their royalties are, and then they basically, the company will just, right from the app, they say, here's my bank account, transfer money to me, boom. And it just shows up in the app immediately as a negative amount that this you're negative on your royalty, and the money automatically gets transferred to your bank account, and you get the cash immediately. So that's another thing that they're potentially looking at.
Okay, nice.
These go on for, it's a relationship, and it's
yeah, for sure.
It's it's a bit of an income, and which is really nice. I mean, you're looking at $4,000, $5,000, $10,000 for little increments and things of that nature. But the other thing is, it's going to start teaching you how to do all kinds of little different options.
Yeah. Well, what sounds wonderful to me is that you not only built this amazing app and had this great success with this app, you're now going to be teaching more people how to develop in LiveCode. People actually within Sony are now going to be developing LiveCode. I find that fascinating. I think you've
exactly. And of course, it's a commercial license for LiveCode too. So.
Indeed, that's wonderful.
No, we do that a lot. I mean, we're still a little bit under the wraps on another app we're doing, but we're actually talking with the government of Brazil. Their 25% of their entire university system is going to be online. Okay. And so, we work to do it. We actually did the web part in WordPress, and we're working with them. I'm actually doing the app in LiveCode. So all the university students will essentially be taking their class in LiveCode. Now, they like it because it's open source. They have to buy a commercial version to get it through, but they really liked it as an option because it was open source. And that's, open source gives you a lot of advantages in that. It gets you at least in the door, allows them to start playing with it, and they see it as a long-term security.
Indeed.
Especially for country, the government of Brazil, it's a 9 months to a year process. Especially you're telling them, their beta test for the online school is 165,000 students. Mm-hmm. That's the beta.
Yeah, indeed. Well, thanks very much for taking time to do this today. You and your team have done a tremendous job. And yeah, I mean, we'd love to see all these new projects that you're talking about come to life.
Yeah, we do. And, some of them we have NDA, so we can't really release all this stuff.
Indeed.
So, but unfortunately, the ones we can, and we have a lot of our own. We have we did one for TOEFL to do, to study English language. We cooperate with a lot of people. We work with Bob in Japan, who's a big LiveCode fan, and what we're trying to do is work with a lot of guys that want to get their app out the door and in the stores, and so we help them. We help big people, small people. We really love LiveCode. We're very excited, especially with the widgets coming. We've been waiting.
It's amazing to hear. Absolutely amazing to hear. Well, thanks again, Todd. I think that's just about come to the end of our time. I'm sure you've got a flight to catch.
I do.
Right. So thanks very much. Great speaking to you. Bye for now.
Okay.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Well, thank you very much indeed for Todd for sharing that really exciting story that you did. It's really great to see LiveCode get used for an app like that, and it's also exciting to hear about that ongoing relationship that you've built with Sony that will hopefully only go from strength to strength into the future. As I've said in previous months, we are aiming to feature customers large and small each month, and if you do have a story that you would like us to share, then please drop Stephen, our digital marketing lead, a line. The other thing that I'm going to ask this month, if you're interested in taking part, after the Phoenix conference I went and toured a couple of LiveCode shops in the USA, and it was really nice actually walking into offices. I mean, there was one where there were a whole row of computers with people programming away inside the IDE. And we thought it would be really nice to collect photos of your office or your workspace to share with the community. So whether you're a one-man band and one-man service company and want to take a picture of yourself at your desk, or whether you have a team or an office environment, I think it would be really cool just to get some of these photos so that other members of our community can see and get a sense for where we all work. So wherever you are in the world, if you're interested and willing to do that, then send those photos in to Stephen. And depending on how many I get, I'll put together a selection next month and share it in next month's monthly report. Okay, so moving on to process progress. As I said, unfortunately we haven't quite managed to get the DP9 out the door. You will have to settle, however, for progress on LiveCode Connect. So today, after me, I think there's a half an hour break, and then Mark is on, and Mark is giving a talk on the first talk on LiveCode Connect, and he does have an early version which you are going to be able to get your hands on and start using today. So I know it's rough, I know there's a bit more work to do on it, but it is the start of this very cool, very useful new feature for allowing you to connect LiveCode to all of these various other services that are compatible with the APIs that we are using. So I can tell you what's going to be in LiveCode 9, DP9. These features are almost finished. It's a question really of just some last refinements and doing the build. The first thing that will be in DP9 is infinite LiveCode for iOS, and that will come with a native object example. It seems to be that it's becoming a bit of a tradition for us to produce a button for each platform that we add infinite LiveCode for, so I suspect strongly that the iOS example there is going to be a button. There will also be the completed networking in HTML5. Michael's been hard at work at that, and it's been completed and is just awaiting review now before it goes into the platform and into the build, and that covers all of the various networking protocols that we wanted to cover. We also have, for the first time, the data grid working in HTML5, and this is the start of the work that we're going to be doing on the data grid to bring you the data grid 2. So one of the things that we promised in the data grid project was that it would run on all of the platforms, and it would run really well, in fact, on all of the platforms that we support, including the web output. So for the first version, for the first time, there will be a version of the data grid working in HTML5 in DP9. And I should be in a position to bring you some more information on Data Grid 2 by the time we get to my talk next month. We've also been working away on the smaller HTML5 feature. This feature has actually turned out to be quite a beast to get finished and get refined. It's turned out to be really quite fiddly. However, we are almost there on that, and it will be going in. There will also be a new Mac native field. You're probably starting to realize that creating these native objects is just a case of tweaking the relevant LCB files. It's only a few words that have to get changed to create each object type. But we will be including a Mac native field. And as we get into September and October, we will be looking at expanding the tools palette with a range of native objects across all of the different platforms. And the goal with those native objects is that they detect the platform that you're on, and so on Mac you get a Mac native field, and then on iOS you get the right one, and on Android you get the right one. So it's just one widget across all of the different platforms. There's also fixes to the Android native field that we introduced last month, together with a new text changed message, and there is the first version of autocomplete in our script editor, something that's really been driven from some of the work that we've been doing on usability. So, I am in a position to be able to show you demos of both the text change message in the Android native field and the new autocomplete feature. So the first feature I'm going to demonstrate is the improvement to the Android native field. So I have two widgets here, an Android native field and just this SVG widget that's just displaying an icon. So if I open up the code editor for the native field here, you can see that I have a text changed handler, and of course that's going to be familiar if you've been working with fields because it's exactly the same message. And here we're looking to see if the text of the target is a number, and if it is, then we're setting our SVG widget to the OK sign, and if it isn't, then we're setting it to the remove sign. So it's a native field that's detecting whether or not you are entering a number. And here it is running on an actual device. So if I go in and open up the native field, you can see that I can type numbers and my icon stays the same. But if I go in and put something that isn't a number, then the icon changes exactly as I would expect. Second feature that I'm now able to demonstrate is the new autocomplete feature. So if I create a button here, let's have a look at what it feels like to use the code editor with this feature included. I'll go onto my handler list on the left and choose to add a mouse up handler. And if I start typing now, so I'm going to do ask to bring up an ask question, I see that I have an autocomplete which has a list of all of the various different formats of the ask command, and underneath it there's documentation, which tells you in this case displays a dialog with a prompt, a text box for the user to enter a response, and OK and cancel buttons. So if I scroll down here, we'll see all of the various different forms on it, and I can go down and here's the password form of it. So like the ask command, but the characters the user types display asterisks. So let's go for that one. I just press tab to get that there. Ask password clear question, so I can put in enter your password. Then I hit tab here to get the next part of the script with default response. So we just put in some characters there that are going to appear in asterisks, titled password dialog sheet. And that's a good example because it's hard to remember the whole cadence of the ask password command, what happens in which order, and by using autocomplete we have that, and we immediately have a working password dialog, which is exactly what we would expect. So if I go in here, let's say we're going to do something different depending on whether they enter a response or not, a fairly standard thing to do. So I can start doing if. If, then else. Well, we'll just take if then, put that in, so if condition then. So if it is not empty, there's our empty. And let's say we're going to call a custom function, so I'm just going to create that function. Oh, there we go, function name. Let's call it my function. So that goes in p variable for the parameter. And so now what will happen here is if I then go get my function, it's figured out that there's my function in the code and that this p variable, although I don't actually want that, I'm going to pass it across here and return the results that I want to there. And of course, if p variable is not empty, then we can go ahead and do whatever code we want to do there in the normal way. So this has been a much requested feature for some time, and it's obviously in its very first incarnation in the product. We're really excited to bring it with you, and it's still getting polished, and no doubt there'll be lots of tweaks to do over the first few versions of it. But it's shaping up really, really well, and we're really excited to bring that to you very shortly. Finally, before we go to questions, I know we've got some of our most loyal customers and users watching today, and I wanted to use this venue to launch a consultation and to ask your feedback around a new edition of the platform that we're planning. And it's at the stage where we're still working out the very last details, and not everything is completely buttoned up. So there is time for us still to make final tweaks and changes before we introduce this. Now, I would ask if you could please keep this to yourself for the moment. I would really appreciate it if we don't see the discussion around this show up on the mailing lists or on the forums. I would very much like you to send me feedback individually, and also not to steal our thunder when we're ready to do the actual announcement. So please just keep this one to yourself for the moment. So what's the purpose of this new edition? What is it that we are trying to actually do here? What's the goal behind this? Well, the first thing that we want to do is to provide something of a bridge between our community edition and our proprietary edition that makes it easier for people to share code between those two editions. At the moment we have the issue that the two worlds are separated because community requires you to produce output that comes under the GPL license, which is viral, and that's not really compatible with use within the indie or business editions of the product. We also want to encourage the production of widgets and extensions, particularly after all the work that we've done to bring you the Infinite LiveCode project. So we want to make sure that we expand the number of people who can run those extensions to the maximum number possible to encourage people to build those components. We want to provide clear value to schools and universities who've got budget, whilst at the same time not taking anything away from the existing community version for those of them that do not. And then we want to be in a position to reinvest some of that revenue into an educational campaign in the USA next year. And the goal of that campaign is to replicate the model that we've employed very successfully here in Scotland. So to give you an idea of what went into that, so we had a number of people here in Scotland, teachers who were evangelizing the product and who had started to produce course materials. And what we did was we had somebody here in Edinburgh essentially coordinate that effort. So they went out, they went into schools, they gave talks, we organised after-school clubs, we spoke to the education authorities, we spoke to the school districts, we spoke to anybody that was really interested or would listen, and we did that consistently. We worked with the people that were evangelizing, and we got their materials up and distributed, and we chipped away at it, and we got eventually to the point that we have about a third of the high schools in Scotland using LiveCode, which is a really good level. It's a really good penetration within the market. And doing that, it's not rocket science, but it does actually take more effort than you might think. We had a resource that was pretty close to full-time on this for a full 2 years, and that was just there to essentially spread the word on what was either a free or a very low-cost product. And that's what it took in a country that's relatively small, the size of Scotland, to get that level of adoption going, and that adoption has been very consistent ever since that effort went in. So it's in everybody's interest that we succeed with this elsewhere, and we'd like to have somebody, initially one person, full-time in the US next year, which means that we do need to generate a little bit more revenue from this space in order to make it affordable to do that. But the benefit to everybody is that the more schools and universities that are using the platform, the more adoption we see in the future, and that benefits everybody by having more people using the platform and building components and libraries and more skills available. And we've really seen the benefit of that here in Scotland really just over the last year or so, when we've been advertising for new job positions. We've actually had candidates now that come in and who have LiveCode skills on their CV. They're coming in and they're saying, well, we did LiveCode in high school. It was our first language and we'd love to come back to it. So it's been very good over here, and we're really focused. We're just looking at how we can replicate that and do something across in the US, which is obviously a larger market and has to be broken up and done piece by piece. But there's a strategy here that's coming together. And the other purpose of this, not so much aimed at educators but aimed more generally, is to create a more compelling long-term starter kit that's a little bit easier to use, a little bit more fun for those people who are dabbling with the platform, hobbyists and people starting out. So how are we going to pull all of this off? What are we doing? What does this actually look like in terms of a product? Well, the product is called Community Plus, and what it does is it allows you to share the stacks that you build in that. So we have a license agreement in this edition that says that you're allowed to share the stacks that you create under a permissive license. And of course that a permissive license is not viral, so it means that those stacks can get used in both our community edition and in our proprietary indie and business editions. It allows you to build open source apps with our engine. So our engine will be a commercially licensed or a modified commercially licensed engine, and your stacks will have to be licensed along with that standalone using a permissive license. So for those of you that have used HTML5, you're probably aware that the community edition of the HTML5 builder has a link that allows you to download the stack, the source code of the stack. And what we'll do over time with Community Plus is we'll probably add to the standalone builder the ability to automatically upload your stack to a repository, and that will really help with code sharing and with making examples available. So the next thing that is going to become possible as a result of that is that you're going to be able to submit, and this will be something again that we specify in the license. You'll be allowed to submit free or non-profit apps, which are open source, into the iOS App Store. And this works because we're not using the Jeep source code here. We're using the LiveCode engine together with your stacks under your stacks will be under a permissive license. You'll also be able to run password-protected extensions that come from our extension store. So a slight variation on password protection in encrypted stacks, and you'll be able to run those extensions. You will also be able to create password-protected or commercial extensions that go into our widget store. Now, we're not going to make any changes to Indian business, so if you're looking at this and you're concerned in any way, password protection is going to work in exactly the same way it did. We're not going to make you go through the store or do anything in any way different for those editions. But in this edition, you'll be able to get extensions from the store, and you'll be able to put extensions into the store. So that means that if you're starting out for the first time and you're playing around and you've got a great idea for a little extension, and you maybe want to dip into LCB and write a little bit of code, or you want to do a library stack that's maybe password protected, well, you can do that with Community Plus, and you can upload it to the store, and assuming that we accept it, you'll be able to go and sell that. We'll also include the very first level of autocomplete in Community Plus. So this will be the first level of product that has autocomplete in it, and it'll cover the entire language. And we see this as a really great educational feature, which is obviously key for the primary target of this, which is our educational user base. And what it'll not have is it'll not have the object introspection or snippets feature. And object introspection is where autocomplete looks at your object to list the custom function or variable names. And snippets is kind of like a library that allows you to store regularly used script handlers for reuse. So we see those more as productivity features, whereas we see autocomplete itself more as a learning feature, and that's why we're doing the split in the way that we're talking about here. So it's going to be $79 a year for an individual, and there'll be a pack for schools for $500 a year or $1,000 a year for a university. And we'll make it very clear in the community edition that this is available. We'll put that information into it so that everybody's aware that this is available. So we really welcome your feedback on this idea. If you're an educator or you're a hobbyist, does this sound appealing? If you're looking at this, whoever you are, is there anything that you don't like about it? If you are an educator and you do have a little bit of budget, is this going to be enough, do you think? Provide enough value for you to upsell to one of the paid extension, one of the paid packs, or do you think that you probably just stay in community? And if you're an indie user, we can't think of any reason why you're going to want to downgrade to Community Plus, because you can only do closed source apps. You need at least indie for closed source apps and for things like TSNet. But is there a reason why you might downgrade to Community Plus? It's important for us to know these things. It's important for us to get this right. I know from past experience that making changes to the product lineup, you have to be really, really careful about it. We've done a lot of homework on this one. We've spoken to a lot of people about it, and we've weighed up these various different options, and it's never easy to work out exactly what should go in each edition and where and why. But these are the reasons and the purpose for what we've done with this edition and what we're planning to do, and we do feel it's fairly close, but we wanted to get your input into this if you're interested in it before we go ahead. It's not too late to make changes and tweaks to the lineup. So the target for this is to launch this in September. So if you do have any feedback on this at all, then please send it directly to me. As I say, I'm really asking for you to send this feedback directly rather than to start a debate in the forums or on the mailing lists. I do regret, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to personally respond to your emails. It's just not possible. But everything that you send, all feedback will be read and is most welcome and will be very gratefully received. So if you've got any thoughts on Community Plus before we go ahead and do it, then it would be wonderful if you could just spend a few minutes and just fire them over to me, and we'd really appreciate that. Okay, well, we have a few minutes left, so I am now going to switch over to the live stream, and Mark and I are going to take your questions. Oh, are we live?
You are.
Very good. Okay, brilliant. Let's have a look. Are there any questions in there?
There's a lot of comments. People are excited, I can tell you that.
Oh, awesome. Okay, yeah, it does look like it.
Screen.
Okay, so is community and both app and HTML5, or are they separate? No, it's one. They're both in it. It's a single product that covers them all. There's a Community Plus edition and Apache or MIT license. Okay, so it's actually going to be, we're going to work very hard to try to explain this license as clearly as we can, because it's obviously important. The LiveCode engine will be licensed under our own license, and what that license will say is that you have to release the source code for your stacks under a permissive license when you use this. So we haven't decided between Apache or MIT as yet. They're both, I think, contenders. I don't think there's a huge amount of difference between these licenses, but we will enforce that you have to share the source code for your stacks when you're distributing things created in this license. And because it's not GPL in terms of the actual engine itself, it gets around the problem that we have with the App Store. Patrick wants the Midwest. Well, drop me a line and send me a resume and a pitch, and you just never know. Okay, we still have a few minutes. I know we started a little bit late, so I'm just going to give it another few minutes for questions, because we'd like to have a break until 6 o'clock. So if any of you's got any more questions, just another couple of minutes. We'll stay on there. Lots of very positive feedback here, so that's good. Love the autocomplete. Yeah, very pleased about that. Yeah, that's coming in TP9. It's almost ready. There'll be a bit of tweaking to do, I think. We'll find that we need to work on making sure that it's always bringing up the very best suggestions, but it should be pretty quick and easy to make those changes. Will there be accompanying lessons? Yes, there should be. So yeah, absolutely. We'll probably need to go some of the content that we have in terms of learning materials. Is it possible to disable the autocomplete in case you don't want it, is it?
Yes, we'll have preferences, probably for various levels of things it does. Some people will want just the simple completion, some people want control structure completion. I always turn control structure completion off generally because it tends to complete in a way I don't type, but lots of other people use it, so we'll definitely make that an option.
But David, that's you disappoint me. I mean, why would you want to turn it off? Well.
I type faster than to complete.
Yeah, no, that's true. Actually, I probably can as well for a simple script. Devin, just to verify, Community Edition will have autocomplete. No, the plan is not to put autocomplete into Community Edition. The plan is to put that into Community Plus. Question from Cyril: what grades are you targeting? So, Cyril, the age range that we are looking at, or that we've had the most success with in Scotland, has been the ages of 13 to 18. Now, I don't want to say that the platform doesn't do well at younger ages, because some people have had a great deal of success at younger ages, and I know that there are some university courses that go a lot older than that. But in terms of there being a really obvious and pressing need in the market, up until about the age of 13, you've got tools like Scratch, which are visual blocks-based tools, and of course it would be great to see somebody build that in LiveCode at some point, but at present anyway, we don't have that tool. But between 13 and 18, there aren't very many languages that are really appealing, and then by the time you get to 18, you tend to go on to do things like Java and JavaScript and so on at the university level. So it's important to be focused. Of course, we would like to be everywhere, but I think it's a good idea to be in places where we have the biggest and most obvious advantage. And by being there and being successful in that space, we can then make that expanding out to other age ranges. I don't know from the top of my head what age ranges are equate to which grades in the US, but that's the ages here in Scotland. It's a bit hard to hear, Mark. Okay, I'm trying to speak up. Educational campaign. Any plans for an African campaign? I mean, I'd absolutely love. I'd love to have an African campaign, but I've got to be realistic. At the moment, we're looking to do the USA.
it's a large enough market, and we just don't have the resources in it to go to other territories just yet. However, if we can pull that off, then absolutely we'd like to spread out further, and one day I do hope we are going to be able to do that. Tim, is it correct to say that everybody with an Indie or business license can release an app under any of these LiveCode license agreements? Yes, I believe that's...
mostly, yes. You can't, well, if you can't release an app you built with business or Indie under something like the GPL, because it creates a conflict, because the engine you're using to build the app is not under GPL. However, you are free to release stacks for your apps under any license you choose if you're using an Indie or business license. So you can get in a situation, for example, you could release the source code under the GPL because you own the copyright. You can still distribute an app commercial engine. Just that if it's features in the commercial engine, obviously it won't work in the community.
A couple of comments here about the sound. Sorry, I don't know what else. I've just checked all the settings, and it looks like the ones that we've always used, so I don't know what else to do. Cyril, it'd be a good idea to have present at education conferences. Yes, absolutely. And that's something that we certainly did a lot of in Scotland when we were doing the effort here. So we would definitely like to be able to do that, attend pretty much everything that there is, or support people in our community who want to attend it. It's, as much of this is about working with the evangelists and the goodwill that exists, and just as being there to support it and coordinate it. Okay, time for one or two more questions, I think. And then I think we'll wrap up and have our break before Mark is back on in 20 minutes, just over 20 minutes.
Yeah. Looks like we might have run out of questions with a bit of luck, because I'd like my 20-minute break, please.
Yeah, indeed. Okay. Oh, yeah. Last one there from Cyril. Are you planning on a textbook or just projects? So the answer is I don't honestly know. I mean, we built, or rather somebody here in Scotland very helpfully built a full, I think it was one book or a series of books. We'll do whatever makes sense here. And we did that. I think we'll try and pick the latest timing, most important aspects of that, and make sure that we cover the curriculum. Okay, well, listen, I think we need to wrap it up and take a break there. But thank you all very much indeed. And if you do have feedback on this, then please just drop an email directly, kevin@livecode.com. As I say, we've still got a little bit of time left to be able to do little tweaks to what we're doing. So that's it from us. Thank you.
Great. We'll see you again, guys, at 6 o'clock with Mark, who has some very exciting stuff to tell you as well. So don't miss it.
Indeed. Yeah. All right.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.